Since complexity and the work of the SFI haven't come up on the show, and because this is going to be relevant for our conversation, there are at least two key terms I'd like to hear how you think about before we go on. And the first is emergence, which different people seem to use to different effects and for different reasons. And I guess I'm wondering how you like to define or think of emergent phenomena or properties.
Yes, well, one of the things about complexity and the terms that have arisen in it, like emergence being one in particular, that they're hard to define, and I've stopped trying to, quote, define them. It's very much, a platitude, but it's like, I know it when I see it kind of idea. I feel that about complexity. Emergence also, but it can be a little more specific, I think. Simply put, I guess, is that, most of the systems we look at when we first look at them are usually collectives of various kinds, whatever they are. Whether they're everything from, the earth itself to societies, to cities, down to materials, to molecules and atoms. And part of the success of science is, in fact, that kind of deconstructing and that reduction to more and more finer scales and looking at the finer levels of their constituents. And that's been an ongoing quest, which I say has been, I would say, enormously successful. But less so has been the sort of going up and the recognition that, and there's been implicit in that idea, maybe I should have added this, implicit in this idea is that if you break it down and you understand, you find out what the constituents are, that, the nucleus of an atom is made up of neutrons and protons. So now, okay, that's great. If we now study the properties of neutrons and protons, we can stick them together. Now we understand all the properties of nuclei because we can, and then we take, and then from that we can add the electrons, we understand the atoms, and then molecules, and then up we can understand chemistry and blah, blah, blah. So physics has always had, and certainly when I came through in graduate school and in most of my career, implicit, that the idea that you can, get the properties of the collective, understand the collective, the many-body system from the properties of its underlying constituents. And in fact, as I say, just a side comment to that within physics, there was sort of this unsaid kind of idea that's why, physics is the most fundamental, and all you got to know is the basic equations, and then, the rest is engineering. So that was very much the attitude, and it might have even been said from time to time, but it was certainly the way physicists behaved. And I would say I was among them. And but then what you begin to realize is that, in most systems, that's simply not the case at all. I mean, the kind of systems I work on now, you are not the sum of all your cells. I mean, you can't just add up all those cells and get, Robinson out of it. You're much more than that. And, a city is more than just all of its people, all of its roads, all of its buildings. You could even categorize everything. And somehow this idea that you could stick it together, and in 2023, there's even the idea that if you put all those together, fed it into a computer, said some magic words like machine learning and AI, turned a crank, out will come all the properties of cities or companies or institutions. I mean, it's kind of a ludicrous idea, but it does conceptually have a lot of weight that people act on, unfortunately. So emergence are the properties that the collective has that are not apparent and explicit in the fundamental constituents. That's the kind of simplest version of what I would say. So that just to repeat what I said, a city is not the sum of all its citizens and all its infrastructure. So, and that is a generic property of most collectives, and in particular complex systems. The other thing that is sort of goes along with that is that, and that's why it's called complex adaptive systems, is these systems are typically, and the systems we normally think about that have these emergent properties are also, they're not fixed. They're continually adapting and evolving in response to external conditions or even internal conditions for that matter. And so emergence also has, I think, a connotation of as being some property of a complex adaptive system, meaning that it is continually changing.
I was just speaking with Michael Levin, who works on complexity, biology, and intelligence at Tufts, and he made a very similar point about collectives that I'd never really thought about before. That he's never encountered an intelligent monad, and I might add that there are no living monads either. So a lot of the interesting things we care about all arise out of emergent properties.
Yes. No, by the way, I said that's exactly right. I just gave a talk at a conference on collective behavior. It was a general one, very general. And the point I make, there's no such thing as an individual human being. It doesn't exist. And the way I put it in terms of the kind of things I work on, I think about scale and the dynamics of scale. And I said, New York is 100 times bigger than Santa Fe, roughly. So the 100 Santa Fe's make up New York, meaning in terms of the number of citizens. But New York produces twice as many patents, twice as many ideas, if you like, if you use that as a proxy for ideas, as 100 Santa Fe's would. And that is a reflection of the interaction and dynamics, the facilitating nature of a large city, that it brings more people together and so on. And so you could ask the question, if you took those 15 million people, which is either 100 Santa Fe's or one New York metropolitan area, and you took them away and you made each one of them a guru and stuck them on top of a mountain and let them meditate, and you could feed them as much as you like, or they'd have enough access to food so they don't die, but they're sitting on the mountain contemplating the universe. How many patents would they produce? 0. Because
have you looked at this?
It's the idea of the guru sitting on top of the mountain is completely antithetical to what human beings are and the necessity of the collective, and therefore the emergent behavior.
Have you at all looked at this with regard to university size? And whether
we have. Yes, we've done some work. We've even published a couple of papers on universities, but we've done quite a bit of analysis, and it's quite complicated, needless to say, partly because what we did, this is just going off slightly on a tangent, there are about 6,500 colleges in the United States. So you said universities, but colleges and universities. They go from Harvards and Stanfords down to some small community college and little private institutions and so on. And we looked at this whole list. And they're divided, of course, into various subcategories, like you're at a private, number one university, of research university, major research university. But there are also public versions of those, like University of Michigan or Wisconsin. And so we looked at the differences, tried to look at the differences just from data. And one of the frustrating things about this work, being a physicist, we didn't have any real theory that we could develop, mathematical theory. But we had lots of data to see how this changes. And the only thing I can say is that the data simply in quotes, reflected what the the university sees as its function and mission, and what it's trying to, in my language, what it's trying to optimize. So Stanford is trying to optimize its research output. Its education. You can see that in the data. You can see in terms of the salary structure, rewards, and so forth. Doesn't care much about education, truly. It's primarily, it's research oriented, and so on. And whereas a small college is much as education, some of the obvious things, but there are all kinds of non-obvious things. But anyway, I don't know if there's much point in spending a lot of time on that. But it was a very interesting exercise. And the one practical thing we try to get out of it, which is still a work in progress, was in fact to use this as a kind of, this is a bit arrogant the way I'm going to say it, is a kind of science-based process for ranking universities. That is not just the kinds of things US News and World Report does, but using some of these metrics to say, once you've got this category of universities and they're trying to optimize this, relative to what the optimization is trying to achieve, how do these universities stack up? And that's very much a work in progress. But for all 6,500 of them, so it's quite a process, actually. And it may not succeed.